lecture 2. This is lecture 2 on chapter 2. Okay. Sorry. All right, so we're going to go over chapter 2, the chemical context of life. So organisms are composed of matter, and anything that takes up space and has mass is made of matter. An element is a substance that cannot be broken down to other substances by chemical reactions, and a compound is a substance consisting of two or more elements in a fixed ratio. About 20 to 25% of the natural elements, or of the 92 natural elements, are required for life. Those are your essential elements. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen make up 96% of living matter. Most of the remaining 4% consist of calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. Then you have trace elements that are required by an organism in only minute quantities. So that was concept 2.1. Moving on to concept 2.2. An element's properties depend on the structure of its atoms. So each element consists of unique atoms. An atom is the smallest unit of matter that still retains the properties of an element. Atoms are composed of subatomic particles, and those three subatomic particles are neutrons, protons, and electrons. Your neutrons are neutral, or they don't have any electrical charge. Protons are positively charged, and electrons are negatively charged. Neutrons and protons form the atomic nucleus, and electrons form the cloud, or the electron cloud, that's around the nucleus. Neutron mass and proton mass are almost identical and are measured in daltons. Electrons are so small they are often ignored when calculating the total mass. So just some review from high school chemistry. Atomic number and atomic mass. The atomic number is the number of protons in its nucleus, and that's also the unique identifier for that specific element. So for instance, carbon, its atomic number is 6, so that means it has 6 protons in its nucleus. It won't have 7 because then it will be nitrogen, and it won't have 5 because then it will be a boron, but carbon has 6 protons in the atomic number. An element's mass number is the sum of protons plus the neutrons in the nucleus. So down here, the atomic mass, which is the atom's total mass, you can calculate that by adding the neutrons and the protons together. So carbon has 6 protons, and because the atomic mass is 12, that means it also has 6 neutrons. And this in the middle is the chemical symbol for that element. Isotopes are two atoms of an element that differ in the number of neutrons, and radioactive isotopes decay spontaneously, giving off particles and energy. Radioactive isotopes are often used as diagnostic tools in medicine. So radioactive tracers can be used to track atoms through metabolism, and they can be used in combination with sophisticated imaging instruments. So like here in this picture, this is a PET scan of a patient, and it has it's basically showing you that the radioactive isotopes that are used as a radioactive tracer, that's used to identify the cancerous throat tissue right there in that patient. So this radioactive isotopes can be very beneficial in medical diagnosis. Energy is the capacity to cause change, and potential energy is the energy that matter possesses because of its location or structure. You can think of potential energy as stored energy, because kinetic energy, which we talked about in chapter 3, that's kinetic, and that's movement. Kinetic energy is showing a type of movement in its energy. Matter has a natural tendency to move toward the lowest possible state of potential energy. And here you see like just a brief section of the periodic table. And what I want you to notice are the characteristics that these elements have in common. So all elements that are in the same column, going up and down or vertical, they all have the same number of electrons in the outermost shell. So hydrogen has 1 electron in the outermost shell, as well as lithium and sodium. In the second column, beryllium and magnesium have 2 electrons in the outermost shell, and it goes on and on and on down the periodic table. As far as the rows help identify how many shells are in that element. So hydrogen and helium, they only have 1 shell in its element. In the second row, all of these elements like lithium, beryllium, boron, and carbon, they all have 2 shells. And then in this third row, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, and so on, they all have 3 shells. So the periodic table can help you identify certain these characteristics. All right, and this is a video talking about the electron arrangement that you can play on your own time. Valence electrons are those in the outermost shell, or the valence shell. The chemical behavior of an atom is mostly determined by the number of valence electrons. Electron orbitals are three-dimensional spaces where an electron is found 90% of the time, and each electron shell consists of a specific number of orbitals. No more than 2 electrons can occupy a single orbital, but there can be more than one orbital in the valence shell. Atoms interact in a way that completes their valence shells, preferring to have 8 electrons in the valence shell, and that satisfies the octet rule. So this picture is trying to help illustrate what the words were saying on the previous slide. And so in your first shell of, let's say, like, just pick an element. Let's say this is, I don't know, neon. That's exactly what it is. This is neon, right? And it has 2 shells. On the first shell, there's only 1 orbital, and it's a 1s orbital, okay? This orbital can only hold 2 electrons. And the same thing with the 2s orbital and the 2p orbitals. They can all only hold up to 2 electrons. However, the big difference between the first shell and the second shell is that the second shell can have 4 orbitals, a 2s orbital, and then 3 2p orbitals, x, y, and z. And each of these orbitals, the 2s, the 2p, 2px, 2py, 2pz, they can all hold up to 2 electrons. So in the first shell, it will only have a max of 2 electrons. But in the second shell, it can have 2, 4, 6, 8 electrons. Up to 8 electrons in that second shell. All right, moving on to concept 2.3. This talks about the formation and function of molecules and ionic compounds that depend on chemical bonding between atoms. Atoms with incomplete valence shells can share or transfer valence electrons with certain other atoms. These interactions usually result in atoms staying close together, held by attractions called chemical bonds. A covalent bond is the sharing of a pair of valence electrons by 2 atoms. In a covalent bond, the shared electrons count as part of each atom's valence shell. And this is another animation to help you illustrate what the previous slide said. A molecule consists of 2 or more atoms held together by covalent bonds. A single covalent bond, or single bond, is the sharing of 1 pair of valence electrons. And so that's represented like this. You have hydrogen right here, single bonded to another hydrogen. And this dash right here just depicts that that's a single bond. So say, for instance, you have another molecule that you would draw out or write out on a 2D figure. You would illustrate a single bond with 1 line connecting from one element to the next element. So carbon has 4 single bonds with 4 different hydrogens. 1 to the east, 1 to the south, 1 to the west, and 1 to the north. A double covalent bond, or a double bond, is the sharing of 2 pairs of valence electrons, and that's depicted here. You have an oxygen double bound to another oxygen, and that's represented by what looks like an equal sign. But that's not an equal sign, that's actually 2 lines depicting 2 bonds, or a double bond. All right, and then this image just tries to show you more examples with the single bonds and double bonds. Atoms in a molecule attract electrons to varying degrees. Electronegativity is an atom's attraction for that electrons in a covalent bond. The more electronegative an atom is, the more strongly it pulls shared electrons toward itself. And so what I really want you to see here from this periodic table, the low end, or the left side of the periodic table, that has a low amount of electronegativity. And as you move to the right side of the periodic table, the electronegativity starts to increase. And also, the bottom portion of the periodic table has a low level of electronegativity, whereas when you move up to the top, or the high end, to the top of the periodic table, it has high levels of electronegativity. So based off of this periodic table, fluorine is the most electronegative element in the periodic table. And then the elements that are also high in electronegativity are oxygen and chlorine. In a nonpolar covalent bond, the atoms share their electrons equally, but in a polar covalent bond, the electronegativity is not as equally shared. So this unequal sharing of electrons causes a partial positive or a partial negative charge for each atom or molecule. So if you see here, oxygen is more electronegative than hydrogen, and so there's like a partial positive charge on the hydrogen and a partial negative charge on the oxygen. And then this animation helps to illustrate what the previous slide said. Ionic bonds, for this slide, atoms sometimes strip electrons from their bonding partners. The two resulting oppositely charged atoms are molecules, or molecules are called ions. A positively charged ion is called a cation, and a negatively charged ion is called an anion. Anions and cations attract each other, and that attraction makes an ionic bond. This slide helps you understand more about net charge and how to calculate net charge of a compound. Compounds formed by ionic bonds are called ionic compounds or salts. And so one salt would be sodium chloride, which is your table salt, and that's found in nature as crystals. This is another illustration. Weak chemical interactions. Most of the strongest bonds in organisms are covalent bonds that form a cell's molecules. Many large biological molecules are held in their functional form by weak bonds. And you have two types. You have hydrogen bonds and van der Waals. A hydrogen bond forms when a hydrogen atom covalently bonded to one electronegative atom is also attracted to another electronegative atom. So in living cells, the electronegative partners are usually oxygen or nitrogen atoms. And this is like a scientific phenomenon because hydrogen is only really supposed to bond with one other element, but it can make these temporary bonds with another high electronegative element, like this nitrogen. And then this is another illustration about hydrogen bonds. Van der Waals interactions are attractions between molecules that are close together as a result of these charges, and collectively, such interactions can be strong. And an example of that would be like a gecko's toe hairs in the wall surface and how they can climb on the wall. Molecular shape and function. A molecule's size and shape are key to its function. A molecule's shape is determined by the positions of its atoms' orbitals. In a covalent bond, the s and p orbitals may hybridize, creating specific molecular shapes. Molecular shape determines how biological molecules recognize and respond to one another. Opiates, for example, like morphine, and naturally produce endorphins have similar effects because their shapes are similar and they bind to the same receptors in the brain. However, we do know that morphine has certain side effects as compared to natural endorphins. So concept 2.4, chemical reactions make and break chemical bonds. Chemical reactions are the making and breaking of chemical bonds. The starting molecules of a chemical reaction are called reactants, and the resulting molecules of a chemical reaction are called products. Photosynthesis is an important chemical reaction and can easily illustrate like reactants and products. So 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 molecules of water react with sunlight to yield 1 glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. So the carbon dioxide and water are your reactants, and the glucose and oxygen molecules are your products. And what helps with this reaction is sunlight. And this is a picture just showing you how showing you an example of photosynthesis. So this plant is underwater and these bubbles are being produced from that plant. Those are oxygen bubbles. So the oxygen gas that's been produced from photosynthesis gets trapped in these bubbles and it floats up to the top. And then the oxygen is released at the top of the surface of the water. All chemical reactions are reversible. Products of the forward reaction can become reactants of the reverse reaction. The 2 opposite-headed arrows indicate that a reaction is reversible, just like so. Chemical equilibrium is reached when the forward and reverse reactions occur at the same time or at the same rate. And at equilibrium, the relative concentrations of reactants and products do not change. If you have any questions, let me know. But that's the end of chapter 2. Thank you.